Thank you, and thanks very much for asking me to contribute to the conference. And it's lovely to see all of you, and for those of you online, it's great that you're here too. So what I want to talk about this morning is, are we educating students for a career in midwifery, or are we training them for the NHS? So I am going to be quite contentious. I hope I don't upset anybody, at least not any of the midwives and student midwives who are present with us today. I hope that you will sort of agree with me. And I want to sort of put it in the context of how we can use a midwifery qualification and not to just think that we are being trained to work in the NHS. So you don't need me to tell you what a midwife is, but I think it's useful just to remind ourselves. The International Confederation of Midwives, the World Health Organisation, and the Nursing and Midwifery Council in the UK all define midwifery as an autonomous profession, and it is a profession in its own right. It is not an extension of nursing, even though in some countries nursing and midwifery are practiced together. The spectrum of care that we provide goes from the preconception care period right through until a year after birth. And of course, in some countries, it will be wider than that. There will be gynae and fertility issues and various other aspects. I think it's also worth remembering that when you qualify as a midwife, the Nursing and Midwifery Council provides you with a license to practice. You happen to also obtain a degree from a university, but the practice license comes from the Nursing and Midwifery Council. And this enables you to practice midwifery in any way at all that you wish, anywhere in the world, subject, obviously, to local, national, and international criteria. And we have to keep that in mind when we're looking at how we might use midwifery qualifications, midwifery experience, and provide something that is also developing a career for us within the profession. So let's just look for a moment at pre-registration midwifery education, and I have focused it in the UK, but there are similarities in many other countries. Obviously, you are developing the skills and knowledge for a degree, an undergraduate degree. So you have university-based education, and you have usually NHS-based clinical practice. The universities are academic. They will look at the evidence, they will focus on physiological birth, and then on helping you to recognise deviations from normal progress and be able to deal with those deviations and the complications that might occur and the emergencies. I do think that sometimes the university side of things, and I've been guilty of this myself in years gone by when I was teaching student midwives at the University of Greenwich, we can be a bit idealistic, but we are trying to promote the ideal of being a midwife and what being a midwife is all about. University education is profession-focused, but it is also a business. So, and latterly, that emphasis for universities has sometimes meant a slight oversubscribing of places. They want bums on seats, basically. Conversely, when you're doing your practical experience, mainly within the National Health Service, you get the practice, but it's not based necessarily on what you're learning in the university. It is based on service needs, service demands, and you are expected to be able to comply with and care for parents and babies requiring you at that time. It is, of course, we don't have to talk about it, incredibly interventionist. We're looking at the pathological side. There is a risk that midwives are becoming obstetric nurses. We have had problems over the weekend with unpleasant and derogatory articles in the Sunday Times and the offshoot of that, saying that midwifery educators are only interested in promoting normal birth at all costs, which of course is not true. The NHS is constantly looking at how to avoid risk in order to avoid litigation. Of course, obstetrics, maternity is the highest financial payout of any healthcare litigation. But what you're doing is workforce focused. It's actually about filling in the gaps, really. It's also finance driven, which is somewhat wasteful. It's very unwieldy. The system is focused around a system that is not fit for purpose. And, I may be now getting onto incredibly contentious language, but it is not fit for purpose. So there is, in fact, a big mismatch between the universities and the service providers, with students and newly qualified midwives caught in the middle. I'd just like to stop and pause on preceptorship. If you're a student nurse and you qualify, you are given choices about where you would like to consolidate your learning, your theory and practice. You can choose surgical, gynecology, medical nursing, accident and emergency, whatever you want to do. And then you consolidate within that area, and if you wish, you develop your career within that area. Consolidation, of course, is always advisable. I am not against the concept of preceptorship, but it should enable you to build your confidence, to consolidate your knowledge, to apply that knowledge to practice, and give you an enthusiasm to proceed within the midwifery profession instead of leaving it and running away from the problems. Midwifery preceptorship is somewhat different. It is, in my opinion, an NHS management strategy to get a workforce that can work around all areas within the maternity services. It is not focused on you and your profession and your career development. That's a generalization. Of course, there are some elements which, and some places where you will be given career development advice and things like that. But I think fundamentally, preceptorship fails to recognize that midwifery is a complete profession with many, many, many specialisms within it. It is not that we are all generic midwives. So it's more about getting the job done. And that, unfortunately, tends to strengthen the obstetric nursing model. And of course, we then have what I call the NHS mentality. When you're training, when you're newly qualified, and even later on as you progress through your work within the NHS, you're indoctrinated into a set of behaviours, you develop attitudes, and you are caught up in the negativity of what the current NHS stands for. It's fear-driven. It is not based on care options. It's fear-driven for you, for medical practitioners as well, I have to say, in their defence, and it's certainly fear-driven for expectant parents, birthing parents, and their babies. It is also, whilst we often go on about evidence-based practice, it is not taking account of experience and the ability to look at events that have happened and learn from those, reflect on those, which of course in universities is a very big part of education. Both universities and the NHS are working on the system rather than looking at the midwifery profession. And there is virtually no education on that whole range of things that you could do as a midwife. Bear in mind, the NHS does not own you. You might think it does when you are, you might think it does when you are training, but it doesn't. So what possibilities are there? Well, of course, we could go through the whole spectrum from preconception care right through to 1 year following birth of the baby, either for the mothers or for the babies. There's lots of areas that you can work in, both geographically, I mean, in the maternity unit, the high-risk area, the low-risk area, the birth centre, in the community, in clinics, all sorts of things. And you could, of course, choose to specialise in a particular area of practice, whether that is conditions, pathological conditions that parents may have. It might be social issues that are there. It may be mental health issues. So lots of things that you could do even within the NHS, but also, of course, without the NHS. There are then also lots of things you may not yet have thought about. It could be sexual health and gynecology. Obviously, with further training, I'm not saying that necessarily at the point of qualification you can do all of that. It might be that you want to train in complementary therapies, acupuncture, massage, reflexology. It might be that you are particularly interested in biomechanics and optimal fetal positioning, or in hypnobirthing, which isn't a complementary therapy. I have to say I'm slightly sceptical about both of those, because when I was a midwife and a community midwife and everything else, those were actually part of standard midwifery training. So we did it and we knew it and we understood how positioning will help to facilitate physiological spontaneous birth. It might be that you want to work with women having caesareans either beforehand or afterwards. Scar therapy, for example, is very popular. You might want to go into scanning, placental encapsulation. You might want to work with the babies, doing neonatal examinations, or look at some other sort of areas as well. And it might be that you want to go into independent midwifery, and that doesn't have to always include birth services. It might be antenatal and postnatal care, it might be complementary therapies, it might be some of these other elements of practice. But I think what's happening, sorry folks, I think what's happening is that we don't necessarily look at what is suitable for each individual midwife, and that is a bit of a problem, because if you don't know about them and you don't know that you are entitled to go and pursue some of those, then you won't necessarily be progressing with your own career in a way that you might have liked. It's also worth remembering that midwifery practice is not just about clinical practice. It's not just about having contact with expectant birthing postnatal parents and their babies. It might be that you choose to go into education. I've been a midwife for nearly 50 years, and 45 of those have been spent in education. I have had clinical practice, but the last time I helped a woman give birth was 10 years ago. I am, however, still on the NMC register as a practicing midwife. And midwifery educators do get a bit annoyed when people say, "Are you still a midwife?" Yes, we are, actually. It could be research, it could be management. Now, management is a specialist skill in its own right. Just because you're a midwife and you've progressed up the tiers doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make you a good manager. So management studies might be something some of you want to do. You might want to work with various other organisations outside the NHS or overseas. You might want to get into research, you might want to write for publication, all sorts of things that you can do that contribute to your revalidation practice hours. Even being a mother. And I have a lot of midwives who work with me via Expectancy, providing complementary therapies. And I recently had a midwife who said, "I've had 2 babies in the last 3 years, I haven't got enough hours." But we actually looked at what experience she had had during her own pregnancies, births and postnatal periods, and I got her to write down a reflection, basically, a lengthy reflection, on what she'd learned that she can contribute towards her midwifery practice. So it's not just about going on the wards or going on the community, it's a range of things. So finally then, how can universities potentially help midwives' career development? First, I think they have to understand that midwifery is not a branch of nursing. We have had Project 2000 for nursing since 2000, and still there are nursing lecturers who fail to understand that midwifery is different. And very few nursing organisations actually understand what the lead midwife for education, her responsibilities, or his. The lead midwife for education, it's a legal role to make sure that we comply as educators with the remit of the definition of a midwife. Obviously, we are promoting physiological birth because that's what midwives do. So irrespective of what the powers that be out there in the media might want to say, that is our job. Childbirth is a normal life event. and we should be promoting physiology and not pathology. I do think we have to look at changing from teaching you for a job to facilitating your career, and that might mean providing careers guidance. It might mean looking at new electives outside the NHS as well as inside. It might be that you go with independent midwives, for example, and shadow them and see what's going on, because there are more and more midwives going into independent practice. So are we training midwives for a job in the NHS, or are we facilitating and preparing them for a career in midwifery which fulfills their own needs as well as those of the people they're caring for? And I'd like to leave you with that question, but also if you want to come and chat, I'm on the stand down in the exhibition hall, and we've also got some free study days to give to you. So thank you very much.